Hey, Georgia, are we open and ready to kick off?
We are Verity, thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Farmers for Climate Action uh, webinar in conversation with Tony Mahar and Paul Nissen on regional Australia's energy shift and the role of the developer rating scheme. I'd just like to start by acknowledging country. I'm joining you today from Balladong, Budja, on the lands of the Noongar people, which is, of course, over in Western Australia. One of the things that Farmers for Climate Action is always so committed to do is to recognise the role of Indigenous knowledge in the way that we manage and care for our landscapes. And so, for us as an organisation, being able to share the locations that we are joining from, to recognise the custodianship that has existed for millennia, to be able to support these landscapes is just so critically important. So, I'd just like to acknowledge elders, past, present, and emerging, and also to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and we are all joining today from what is traditionally and always will be Indigenous lands. So, it is my great pleasure to welcome all of our attendees along to learn a little bit more about what's going on within Australia's energy systems. It is always an interesting space. We know that there is so many opportunities for farmers and rural Australia within the energy shift. I do apologise for background noise. I'm joining you today from Northern and it is a little bit noisy here. Um, we're here really to be able to learn a little bit more about the developer rating scheme and the opportunities that the clean energy shift really offers for Australian farmers, rural communities. We have two absolutely fantastic speakers here with us today. Let me just share with you their bios. So, Tony Mahar will be no stranger to many of you. Tony is the current Australian Energy Infrastructure Commissioner, and of course, prior to that role, was CEO for the National Farmers Federation, a critically important role where he really led a lot of the industry engagement around these areas of clean energy and its intersection with agriculture. Tony took on the role of the Australian Energy Infrastructure Commissioner back in 2024. And for a long time in his career, and indeed looking forward as well, Tony has always cared deeply about fairness and about securing positive outcomes for farmers and for rural communities as well. And we see that work reflected when Tony is travelling around the country and making sure that farmer voices and the voices of rural communities are sort of front and centre in these conversations, but also ensuring that there is a high degree of equity there along the way as well. Making sure that there is trusted voices who are able to do the translation, to cut through some of the noise, some of the polarisation that unfortunately can interfere with the way that we have the conversation about Australia's energy shift. It's just so exciting to be able to welcome Tony to be part of this webinar here today. And so without any further ado, Tony, I might hand over to you to share a little bit more about the developer rating scheme, the concept, the function, and how it is actually going to support rural Australia to engage in the energy shift moving forward. Tony, over to you.
Thanks, Verity. Afternoon, everyone. And Verity, thanks to you and Farmers for Climate Action for facilitating the webinar, but also really an ongoing pleasure to work with you and Charlie and the rest of the broader Farmers for Climate Action team. You really, as you say, worked with the National Farmers Federation, and it was great to have your contribution and to partner with you on a whole range of things. So yeah, afternoon, everyone. Hope you can hear me and see me okay. I'm based here in Canberra. And what I'd like to do today is to, as Verity said, talk about the developer rating scheme and what an important tool, valuable tool, contribution it is going to make to the discussion, the rollout, the transition. So Verity's, I think, outlined my role. I've been in the Energy Infrastructure Commissioner role now for almost 2 years. And yeah, I'm really passionate about rural and regional communities and sustainability, but the role itself. We take complaints. We're an independent organisation appointed by government, funded by government, but independent. And I am really careful and upfront about my commitment to that independence. When I talked with Chris Bowen about taking the role on, I was very clear to him that I wasn't going to be a complaints clerk. I was going to be independent and call, bad behaviour out, and also acknowledge and support good behaviour, of which there is definitely lots going on. But the developer rating scheme is an initiative that was called for as part of the community engagement review that was done by my predecessor, and we're going to cover a little bit of detail today, but if there's one thing that I'd really like for people to take away from today's webinar, and if they're watching it later, the developer rating scheme is an important, valuable, credible tool that can help address the community expectations, the behaviour, and help communities get more confidence about what's going on in their community. And most recently, just to demonstrate that, developers that are now wishing to bid into the capacity investment scheme, so that's a Commonwealth program for reducing financial risk for investors, must have commenced the developer rating scheme in order to apply. So that's a really good demonstration, the government backing, identifying and acknowledging the concerns that the community have around developers and their performance and behaviours. It's a good signal to the market to say, if you want to get capacity investment scheme funding support, then you must comply with and be engaged and rated in the developer rating scheme. So that's just a really good commitment. And again, a takeaway for anyone watching or listening, if you're engaging with developers, one of the key takeaways from today is to make sure that you ask and as part of the conversation with any developers, the question of, are you rated under the developers rating scheme? If not, why not? So a takeaway. So as I was alluded to before, the community engagement review was undertaken by my predecessor, Andrew Dyer, and that review was undertaken in 2023. That report came back with pretty scathing reviewer responses and performance of what was going on in the energy transition, and that will be of probably no surprise to anyone on this call. There was pretty appalling, I would say, results, and yes, it was a survey, and yes, we shouldn't sort of ignore some of the good behaviour, but it was a snapshot of the sort of things that needed to be improved from the community's perspective around how the community was engaging with developers. And I think it was an appropriate reflection on and milestone to for my role, but also for everyone to come together and address some of those key concerns. And that was that there was a lot of frustration in the community, and the quality of engagement varied significantly from community to community. So there was 9 recommendations, and the first was to establish the independent rating scheme. So that's the developer rating scheme that we've got in front of us, and the Commonwealth and all of the governments accepted that. And this scheme exists because communities were asked what they wanted, and the answer was that we need more confidence, we need more accountability about what is going on in the space. So it was built up from a series of working groups and on the ground stakeholders and cohorts over what sorts of things needed to be included in this developer rating scheme. So the independent landholder lived experience panel, Charlie Prell was an independent chair, and thanks again to you, Charlie, for your ongoing contribution to that. And working with the AEIC. So in terms of what is the developer rating scheme? It's ultimately, as the name suggests, a scheme that looks at the performance and behaviour of the developers as they're undertaking their activities in the regions, and it has a number of criteria or characteristics that go into developing that ratings that is given to the companies. It's a voluntary scheme, but the core one is around community engagement, and what does that engagement look like? What's the conduct? What's the accountability? What's the provision of information? What's the genuine partnership? What we're looking for here ultimately is to make sure and give the community confidence that there is a genuine partnership, that communities hosting this renewable energy infrastructure are getting value, that the rural and regional communities are better places to live and work and conduct business, and that has been a challenge and will be a challenge. It's a significant transformation that is being undertaken right across the country, and some are, more progressed than others. But the developer rating scheme is, as I've said, a valuable contribution. It's not going to solve everything. I should be upfront about that, but it will be a really valuable tool that will give confidence and accountability to communities and to the companies to demonstrate. We should also acknowledge this, that it'll be an opportunity for the companies to demonstrate all the good work that they are doing. And if they're very confident and committed, which a lot of them are around their work, notwithstanding the challenges, then the developer rating scheme will show that. So it's and Paul's going to go into the details, so I won't go into too much detail. But where's it up to? Well, it opened up to industry on the 6th of March this year, so it's a number of months open now, and companies, as I understand it, are going through the scheme, the assessment process at the moment. So we're watching really closely. In fact, I had a meeting with the Minister's office yesterday, and have ongoing discussions with Equifax and the department, given my independent role, to make sure that it is progressing and that we are confident that it will do what it says it's going to do, and it can be a really valuable tool. So that process is happening at the moment. There was a really good indication I mentioned before about the capacity investment scheme, which was a really good signal for communities. So I've alluded to this a little bit. We have to be sure about what the developer rating scheme is and what it is not, because I've said all the way through those that have had anything to do with the discussions that I've been, it's a bit of a or rhetoric that or mandate that I've been very consistent. We have to be really clear about what this developer rating scheme is and what it is not. As I said before, it's unlikely to solve every single person's challenges and problems and concerns in this space. That being said, it's going to be a valuable contributor. It is going to be a good tool to provide trust and transparency, to uplift the industry capability as a whole. But it's not going to, for example, I've been travelling this week. It's not going to, make things go away. It's not going to make people that don't want energy infrastructure in their community. This is not the tool that is going to satisfy those concerns. Let's be absolutely clear. But it should help ensure that the community is going to be better off, and it's a tool that the community can use to their advantage to make sure that they are more confident about that. And I suppose, if someone was to ask me what a measure of success might look like, if we were to redo the community engagement review and we have better results and more confidence and more accountability and more communication, more expectation management around the energy transition, then better performance in a couple of years' time, then that would be a measure of success. Would have lower frustration in the community, lower anxiety, and more clarity around the community being better off from the energy transition, and the community value and community benefit being more tangible. So that's what I look. If someone was to say, is this tool going to actually work? We go into communities in a year's time or 2 years' time and there's more confidence and more transparency and more tangibility of the benefits. That's what success looks like to me. As I said before, the scheme is voluntary, and my firm view is that not only industry needs to get behind this, but all levels of government. So from the Commonwealth and states and local, it can be a tool that all of government stakeholders get behind, support, advocate for, to make sure that it has got cross-level, cross-industry government or all level, making sure that we give this tool every chance of success and that it can be everything we want it to be. So that will continue to be my ask when I talk to local governments, state governments, and to the Commonwealth, is that we push the developer rating scheme. And again, that was demonstrated with the capacity investment scheme commitment. So that is a very quick overview. I know Paul's going to go into some detail, Verity, and I hope that has provided a bit of a snapshot of the background to the developer rating scheme and its intent, and ultimately what we hope it will do for communities and the industry to help make this transition smoother and fairer for everyone. So happy to leave it there and come back if there's provision for any questions any later.
Tony, thank you so much for that fantastic overview and those sort of key takeaways around, making sure that if farmers or communities have developers coming in, they put the question to them of, are you rated? And if you're not, why not? And then I really love those measures of success for you, that lower frustration, that lower anxiety, that better recognition of value and more transparency over benefits as well. Because at the end of the day, that's what will make this clean energy shift actually really work for farmers and for rural communities. We do have some questions coming into the Q&A and into the chat. Please, everyone on the webinar, please do keep those questions coming in. I'll invite Paul to speak now because I know he's got some slides and he's going to talk us through a little bit more of the detail, and we'll come to all of your questions at the end. So please do just keep popping them in. I can see them all coming up and I'm really looking forward to a good discussion. So I will now just invite Paul Nissen, the Principal Product Manager from Equifax, to join us. So as Principal Product Manager at Equifax Australia Credit Ratings, Paul leads the strategy, innovation and end-to-end life cycle for our independent construction industry ratings, financial viability and credit rating products. Paul's focus is on translating market needs into actionable product roadmaps, driving strategic change and championing new solutions that leverage Equifax's data analytics and technology. Paul is accountable for everything from go-to-market planning and sales enablement to product marketing, ensuring the product offerings continue to expand and meet the evolving demands of the market. And Paul has been a key participant in delivering and developing the developer rating scheme. So Paul, I'll invite you to take the stage and share your screen. Thank you.
Thanks, Verity. I'm always a bit shy when I hear my intro, so thank you very much. But good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking some time to join today. I know how precious your time can be on farm, so genuinely appreciate making that opportunity to hear from us and what we can offer for Farmers for Climate Action. So today, just stepping through the operational launch of the Renewable Energy Developer Rating Scheme, or DRS, just a little bit shorter. At its core, the scheme's designed to help address a critical missing piece in the Australian energy transition. So that's trust and accountability, as well as providing some practical authority for agricultural communities. So whether you're considering hosting clean energy infrastructure on your property, dealing with transmission developments across your district, the scheme is built to give you leverage and transparency that you deserve. So if you've not heard of Equifax before, I'm not surprised. Often we're associated just with credit scores or say equipment finance and mortgaging. But let me just clarify exactly who we are and why we're involved with the scheme. So Equifax is an independent global data and analytics organisation. In Australia, we serve as the largest consumer and commercial credit risk bureau, as well as providing services around background checks, fraud and ID. So what does that mean? When a bank, major business or government department is wanting to understand if someone's financially solvent, has operating capability or is trustworthy before entering a contract, they're coming to us seeking some advice. So we don't own energy projects, we don't build transmission lines, we don't buy land. We're independent from the process and a neutral provider of data and insights. So we've previously worked on something similar in a due diligence model for the construction industry. That initiative was referred to as iCert, which worked to weed out untrustworthy building developers while also elevating those that are able to deliver reliable built assets. Now through the DRS, we're bringing that same level of rigorous background checking to the renewable energy sector, doing that heavy analysis so that individual landholders don't have to. So over the next 15 minutes or so, just wanted to walk through a couple key areas. So why the scheme was built and how. The 7 criteria that go into evaluating energy proponents and stripping away that corporate spin. what the public rating system looks like and how you can use it as a practical tool, as well as how you can leverage this framework in regional communities moving forward. So let's be completely honest about why DRS exists. Regional Australia has borne the brunt of a chaotic energy rollout. Okay, farmers routinely face aggressive sales tactics, poor consultation, and speculative developers, which might be referred to as flippers, who secure access rights on prime agricultural land with grand promises only to flip these options on to unknown third parties, while having always lacked any genuine intent around delivery. DRS was developed specifically to end that dynamic, to draw into focus those organisations that can deliver on the energy transition in the right way, to provide transparency, to encourage continuous improvement, and to uplift the energy sector at large. But Equifax doesn't hold the silver bullet here. Instead, what we worked through was establishing a broad working group that put landholders and local communities right at the centre of the process. We worked directly with the Landholder Lived Experience Panel, local government representatives, First Nations bodies, and other peak groups. Solicit over 1,000 feedback contributions into the design and into designing a system that would restore community trust and enforce accountability and provide transparency. So no doubt we've all heard stories about speculative operators entering a region, making grand promises, or simply ignoring community concerns, locking in farmers to options and then selling those rights off. That land flipping practice creates immense stress and fractures local communities. By putting in this direct input from the lived experience panels, again, being farmers, local councils, and traditional owners, we ensured that the DRS was able to expose those damaging practices early and protecting regional communities from short-term opportunists and immature operators. So how do we actually evaluate energy proponents? First, it's important to understand that DRS is not a quick box ticking exercise, nor is it a basic self-assessment survey. It applies across all grid scale technologies, be that wind, solar, hydro, battery storage, or transmission infrastructure, anywhere in Australia. The methodology evaluates 135 attributes across 7 core pillars. To even make it into the public register, a company must clear strict operational thresholds to be certified as trustworthy. If they pass that threshold, their community engagement practices are then awarded a 1 to 5 star rating. This ensures that developers are incentivized not just to meet a minimum compliance standard, but to continually improve upon how they treat and interact with local landholders and neighbours. So we anchor our evaluation what we're terming the 7 C's. 7 C's as they translate into real world priorities. They would sit with capital and capacity. So does this renewable energy developer actually have the financial strength to survive? Whether that's survive through to development approval on a project, or if they're intending to own and operate it through its life cycle. Will they be solvent enough to make guaranteed lease payments, or in due course, whether or not they have the capacity there to eventually decommission a site. With character and conduct, what is their track record? Do they have pending litigation, a history of court battles, unpaid creditors, or regulatory breaches? Under capability and counterparties, we're looking at who they're hiring to build on your land. Do they enforce their strict biosecurity protocols, for example, and quality standards, or do they cut corners when it comes to appointing subcontractors? And then lastly, but most importantly, with community, how do they engage with you, the hosts, the neighbours and local government? Do they have processes to consider and consult on matters like road impacts or shared benefits? Let's dive a little bit deeper there. Because community consultation has historically been the biggest pain point in regional Australia, We evaluate developer maturity across 5 distinct domains in that regard. So it's broader community, it's how they're engaging with landholders, local government, First Nations, and neighbours. A developer cannot get a high rating simply by offering generous contracts to a host landholder, sorry, tongue-tied, while completely ignoring neighbours who deal with, say, visual impacts or construction impacts. Framework measures whether engagement is respectful, transparent, and sustained during the life of the project. So we're explicitly separating out this community element here, including items like neighbours, because we appreciate that community friction rarely stays contained within a single property boundary. While a host landholder might receive fair treatment and payments, their direct neighbours may suffer uncompensated consequences and impacts such as dust or construction noise, visual disruption, etc. So it damages the social fabric of the entire region when engagement is not done well. So let's turn to the practical outputs and what you see when you're looking up a company. So we recognize that when proponents approach your district, you rarely know the parent company or the structure or the internal ownership. And you usually are faced with just a local project name. So to support this, the DRS register is searchable by many means. So project names, developer names, technology, region. You're able to see whether a company holds an active trustworthy rating. And if their status is update pending due to a major operational change, or if that rating has been withdrawn. So every rating is valid for 12 months. You know that you are always being able to view fresh data. I'll just reiterate here, the register will only show for you trustworthy businesses that have obtained a rating which demonstrates that they've met that trustworthy threshold under the methodology. And importantly, they've achieved a 3-star rating on their community engagement criteria or better, and that they've consented to disclose that rating. If you can't find a developer that you're dealing with, they either weren't able to demonstrate the maturity and capability of a trustworthy business, or they didn't want to get rated. So when you're reviewing a developer's community engagement star rating, setting your expectations here are vital. So a 3-star rating is most certainly not a fail grade. It represents a solid and robust standard of practice that meets the benchmarks and expectations for consultation and risk management. Yep, good rating. 4-star signifies an advanced practice, highly transparent engagement practices, while 5 stars are reserved for true market leaders and entities that are driving deep community benefit sharing, co-design processes, and long-term regional investment. I'll pause there. 3-star ratings are really good ratings. I just want to reinforce that point. But as you click through on a company's profile on the public listing, it gives you further transparency. You can see verified details, including ownership, whether private or public or foreign backed, entity size, active states, key project locations, and the methodology disclosures that are required. Strips away sales pitches and gives you just the facts. Yep. So renewable projects often involve complex structures with parent companies, joint ventures, local subsidiaries. The public listing strips away that opacity and displays to you just those key facts around entity size, ownership, where they're working, and what stages of a project life cycle that they are active within. But behind the public listing, developers also receive a private report directly from Equifax outlining their operational strengths and identified improvement areas. So when a developer approaches you to start option negotiations, we would encourage any landholder to say, show us your DRS assessment. A developer is confident in their governance and community commitment will be transparent with that information. This private report is designed to uplift the industry rather than simply to penalise. When developers receive this detailed feedback, it highlights gaps in their local consultation or contractor governance. It might give management a clear roadmap then to fix those issues. So requesting to view this report early during negotiations gives you greater transparency over how serious that proponent is about their operational improvements. So how does the assessment process work and how much friction does it create? So it's vital to understand here that Equifax does the majority of the heavy lifting here, not landholders, not councils. We're independently running a number of background checks, litigation searches, tribunal audits, and we're also obtaining things like references from communities where this proponent has worked in previously. For a legitimate developer with sound governance, participating takes around 20 hours of administrative effort for them to provide the documentation to evidence processes that they have in place, all evidences that they should have on hand. The whole review takes less than 60 days. If a developer elects not to undergo the DRS rating, it tells you everything you need to know. It usually means they lack the documentation, the financial transparency, or community track record to withstand independent scrutiny. In fact, the feedback that we've received from industry participants to date that have completed their rating has been resoundingly positive. They've highlighted the value that has come from reflecting on their own business, their practices, and the community outcomes they've delivered. From the unbiased assessment of their maturity, as well as providing them with an ability to identify which of their processes need improvement. All elements that support the intent of the renewable energy sector, support the intent of the DRS to uplift the renewable energy sector and enable it to deliver on the national energy transition. So let's get into some of the benefits that would be available to regional Australia. So for farming communities, the DRS fundamentally shifts the power balance. So historically, landholders face a huge information asymmetry. Developers knew everything about not only themselves, but the project, while farmers knew very little about the true health, practices, or ethics of the company knocking on their door. DRS acts like an independent health check. Before you sign an option agreement, host a community meeting, or negotiate access, you can check their rating. It helps give local councils and neighbour groups a common benchmark of expected capabilities and behaviours for community engagement standards. For industry, or for higher integrity energy developers, the DRS is a powerful asset. Honest developers who invest in and value the communities where they operate can be elevated from those bad actors that tarnish the whole industry and provide fuel to those who fundamentally oppose the energy transition. The scheme allows reputable proponents to stand out, build genuine local trust faster, reduce project delays, and secure the appropriate low-cost financing to provide by proving, their operational maturity. And for government, well, the DRS provides a clear operational filter. Governments can use these independent ratings during competitive tender processes, such as access right reviews, and they can ensure that public concessions and grid connections are prioritised to developers who respect regional communities, honour First Nation engagements, and possess the financial capacity to finish what they start. So where to from here? As Tony mentioned, the developer rating scheme is live. We're actively conducting ratings across proponents operating in Australia right now. Public register will go live as soon as our inaugural cohort completes their assessments. As members for Farmers for Climate Action, your action plan is simple. Make the DRS standard practice in your region. Whenever a developer, transmission proponent, or agent approaches your property, local council asks them one direct question. What's your DRS rating? Demand that they undergo the assessment before you're entering that negotiation for land access. But I'd like to take this opportunity again to thank you for your time today. The energy transition must be done with regional Australia, not to regional Australia. And an independent tool like DRS helps ensure that agricultural productivity, long-term solvency, and community respect remain front and centre. I'll pass back to you, Verity, and I'm happy to work through some of the questions.
Oh, thank you so much for such an informative and detailed presentation. I certainly learned a lot on the way through, and it's just so exciting to see the increased transparency and confidence that farmers and rural communities can have through the availability of the DRS tool. Pardon me, before I throw to questions, I just wanted to take a moment to actually acknowledge the work that has gone into this. Particularly Charlie Perel, I know you are on the call somewhere. Your work in terms of supporting farmers and making sure that that independent view and perspective is integrated is just so fundamentally important. So thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Tony, for your leadership in this space, and Paul for Equifax being involved and actually really helping to make sure that the architecture is working quite effectively to give that accountability, transparency, and at the end of the day, confidence back to rural communities. And of course, to Alex and the team at DQ, it's fundamentally important that this was actually able to be developed and implemented. And so we're really excited to see it. We have had a number of questions start coming in through both Tony's presentation and yours, Paul. So Georgia, I'm not sure if you can spotlight for me both Tony and Paul. If you can, that would be fantastic. But I'll just start opening up with some of the questions. So Andrew Fisher has asked, how do you filter out the responses from anti-renewable proponents that will rate a developer low just because they will not stop progressing, despite the developer doing all they can to engage and be transparent? So I guess that's a really interesting one to throw to both of you and explore what can that potentially look like in practice.
Verity, I might, Paul will have probably a much better answer than me, but Andrew, I totally subscribe to this question, and I've asked it. Paul will be familiar with me asking it in the many meetings that we've had. I think it's a real issue that I think can be addressed, but there will be, and we know there's lots of concern or opposition and frustration in the community that will never be satisfied by this tool or any others. So it is something that I've been really conscious of, to just acknowledge and accept that might happen, and how best do we actually manage it. So and I think, I'll throw to you, Paul, but it's certainly something that I've been monitoring and make sure that I think going forward we have to make sure that it's the system is working well enough so that it isn't compromised by campaigns or anything similar.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. So in terms of how do you filter out sort of the I don't want to say the noise, the sentiment that could come from those that will fundamentally never support a project. The framework is around ensuring that an organisation is going through the requisite sort of consultation. They are genuinely listening. They're taking on board the community feedback to the project, and if they're unable to reflect a requested change or the abandonment of a project, they're able to articulate the why. Yeah, and they have heard. They've been able to respond accordingly. Now, I'm working on the extreme end there, so where you're working to someone that just will never support. That actually doesn't have a negative impact on their rating under the scheme. What we're looking for there is that process and evidence of that process flowing on that project around soliciting the feedback, processing that feedback, responding to that feedback. So that's what's informing the rating.
And can I just add as well? So that's all very good, but I do think going forward there will be a requirement to just review and make sure that that we get the balance right between, if there are people just putting in mischievous claims or representations, balanced up with again, acknowledgement, transparency, where there is evidence and there is demonstration of poor behaviour to make sure that the systems work. So for me, it's an open process to make sure that the system does or is doing exactly what it's designed to do. So that's a monitoring process for me.
Thanks
Yeah.
both. And I think that's this really important point that, we hear consistently is that there's a lot of noise that surrounds the clean energy shift, and tools like the DRS really help to cut through that. Lorraine has asked a very similar question, and you may already feel like you've answered it, but I'm going to throw it to you so that the audience can be aware these are the conversations we're having anyway. So Lorraine has asked, how can the tool overcome that dominance of loud voices over majority acceptance of projects? And I would assume this is to do with the transparency, the accountability, the confidence. But back to you two. How can the tool really cut through that noise?
For me, it's evidence and demonstration, provision of documentation that does very clearly outline what processes have gone. So if it is consultation or provision of information, then the company should be able to say we've done X, Y, and Z up against any claims that they haven't been in the community or they haven't sort of provided information. So it's absolutely critical that the system provides that level of transparency so that we can just acknowledge this is very contentious space, and that we're really clear. And it's totally down the middle, making sure that everyone's got confidence in it, for me.
Yeah, so I mean, just to build on that and reinforce it, it is that data-driven evidences that drive the rating, right? So, a proponent will claim to listen. We're seeking the evidence of that happening along the way, which is why it's not that immediate it's not a tick and flick process. It does take time for them to be able to pull together the artifacts that support their claimed processes.
Thanks both. And we'd also have a question in relation to what communication is being done to the developers or with the developers and their staff. So the person asking is indicating that they have farmers asking their developer contacts in the region, and the developers are responding with, well, I've never heard of the DRS. So it'd be really interesting, maybe Paul, I'll throw that one to you to start with, to just get a sense of what actually is that communication framework like that is going out, not just to, I guess, the senior echelons of the developers, but also to make sure that it lands on the ground, and we have clear transparency around this as well.
Yeah, so certainly an ongoing exercise here, and I think you might have hit me with the criticism in the question is that it is starting at the top in those corporates, in terms of that communication layer is going out to those sort of decision makers and more senior leadership. So the extent to which we're getting that message to the on the ground staff around the existence of the DRS and the benefits into community, that's probably I can take that one in that we can do better.
Early days, Paul. Tony, did you want to add to
it? Just really quickly, I think there's a big job, and again, I've not been shy in saying this, but I think there's, that has to go to the corporates, in terms of the process. But I think there's a big job for all of us to keep asking. So, as I said, as Paul has said, as I've said, the community and people to keep asking at every level, where's the developer rating scheme? But I do think that there is an ongoing task for governments and industry and stakeholders like myself to keep talking about it, keep publicising the developer rating scheme, because that way we give it every chance of success. And if I'm honest, I think, we had to wait until it was built and companies have their process to go through it. But I really feel in the next near, immediate term, we need to be shouting from the rooftops about this tool and making sure everyone knows about it and uses it.
And we are so glad to have you both online today to be able to shout from the rooftops, and noting that those who are joining recognise that in our RSVP list, we have people from all over Australia who will be able to take this message back to their communities as well and really demand that accountability, so that we build out that drumbeat of, hey, if you've got a developer coming into your community, the DRS is there to make sure that this energy shift is looking after farmers, communities, and ensuring that we have best practice occurring. We have a question from Gerhard, which is a really interesting one. So following on from the 7 Cs model, which I just love that framing by this, the 7 Cs, just so easy to remember, really clear cut. But Gerhard's question is, how is the 8th C, commercial in confidence, handled by Equifax, and how much of the findings are actually released for public scrutiny?
It's a great question, Gerhard. So I'll frame it here firstly in that, firstly, DRS is a voluntary scheme. Yep. So it is addressing the broad ecosystem of renewable energy developers. So whether they be small private enterprise, whether they be publicly listed businesses, whether they be government enterprise or government-owned entities. So there is, across that gamut, a very varying level of existing disclosure obligations for those companies. And I appreciate that what we ask for them to provide during the ratings process itself was in itself, I would have loved to have taken more, right? But this is where we have landed is a concessional, I'm going to say, middle ground in terms of I'd love more data, and industry's like, well, no, I can't give you that. It's commercial in confidence. There's no way I'm ever releasing that information. So we've landed on the space of, disclose this to us as a licensed credit ratings agency that has really strong controls in place around disclosure and confidentiality. At least be transparent with us as a third party, independent to your objectives, to allow us to assess it. Yeah, so short answer is a lot of the information that they provide through the assessment process is commercial in confidence. It is information that we cannot reuse or resell, repurpose. It does enable us, however, though, to take a view of the industry in aggregate. And we're able to help inform policymakers then with sort of areas that, drawing out perhaps areas that as an industry, there is opportunity to improve by, whether that be a legislative change or a targeted focus around, uplifting capability, etc. So short answer is it's commercial in confidence. So what you can see on the public register is freely accessible, right? And that's gated by those companies that are firstly trustworthy and then allow us to release that information. When we release the information, we release it to everyone at the same time. It's not sort of selective. It'll always go out at once. And then they are provided with that report, which they have the discretion to share with you. But the underlying data, whether that be, contracts, whether that be policy documents, procedure documents, board minutes, financial statement data, that information doesn't get released from us.
Thanks, Paul. Tony, did you want to add anything to that one? Okay, no worries. Thank you. So we have a question from Luella down in Victoria, and I love this question, Luella. So thank you for putting it in there because it really speaks to the different levels of maturation of this industry as well. So Luella's question is to really, Paul, to you, and I'll invite you to jump in on it as well, Tony. But how are the different assessment criteria weighted? How would a first-time developer be assessed against some of the criteria that rely upon past experiences?
Yeah. So again, good questions. Good audience. So there is a differential between the 7 Cs. So not all 7 Cs are equal in their contribution to the outcome. However, they all address really important criteria and attributes of a company. So again, I'll reinforce that the community is the single largest of those 7, given that the pain point that the DRS is looking to address. So how does one newly established organisation, how can it be assessed against one that has been, in the industry for a longer period of time? So first off is around sort of what is the process, what's the approach? So it's one thing to go, I've never had to do this before and I'm not sure how I'm going to do it, versus I've never done it before, but this is exactly how I'm going to do it. So as an example, if I'm talking through complaints or disputes process on a project, let's say, and that particular project hasn't had a complaint or a dispute raised against it, well, I'm not exactly going to mark them down for not actually having had to respond to a complaint or a dispute yet. So, but they've been able to evidence that they've got a process and a pathway in place to be able to. Right, that's one point. The other point I'm going to say is new company doesn't mean new people. People bring experience to these companies, yeah? So we can also reflect the tenure, experience, competency, and capabilities of the people behind the company. Yeah? So that factors and weights in as well. But if I'm a company that's newly established with all new people who have no idea what they're doing in the industry, arguably it's really hard for me to demonstrate that I know what I'm doing. Or for the community to be confident then that you're going to be able to do well. So it's not to say it's a barrier per se, but I mean, absent competency and capability from a corporate level or a leadership level, and absent financial capacity, I mean, you sort of, it's an uphill battle to be able to deliver in that scenario. Tony, I'm not sure if you wanted to build on anything on that one.
Well, I think you've covered it. I think it's going to be as ever, and I don't want this to sound like a fallback position, but it is going to be a work in progress. This is a new tool, and we're going to have to make sure that we, as I said before, monitor and review and update the tool as it goes forward. So, but I think you probably covered it as best as I could.
So the next question that we have, and thank you to both of you for addressing that one. The next question we have is really in relation to how the DRS might potentially intersect with state-based schemes. So noting that Queensland has a developer code of conduct occurring as well. So how would you see the DRS interacting in that space?
Yeah, absolutely. So fundamental. So we're acutely aware that every jurisdiction has its nuances in terms of legislation or policy frameworks, etc. So part of what we're looking for in the DRS is how an organization is able to identify what their obligations are in their project that they're working towards, and how they're able to satisfy then that they are meeting the obligations of that particular jurisdiction. That said, the maturity frameworks that exist for something like community engagement it's the same framework across the country, right? Acknowledging that some jurisdictions will, as a legislated requirement, have a higher hurdle than others. Yeah. But how we score you is based on what you're doing, right? So just because you're operating in a jurisdiction that doesn't require it doesn't mean you automatically rank really well when there are other proponents in jurisdictions that do require certain activity, that they do get the rating that reflects those. I think I'm dancing around that question, but the sentiment hopefully is clear. Only because I haven't seen that.
I'd try and answer it by saying it should absolutely be complementary. I'm really cognizant that there are, state-based approaches, company by company commitments and codes and guides and all those sorts of things, and that is fantastic. Full stop. They should, we should acknowledge those. That being said, there remains concerns and challenges in the community. So hence, the developer rating scheme has been implemented, but they shouldn't compete with each other. They should complement each other. And as Paul I think said, at their core, they should have a lot of similarity. Now, in its worst case scenario, if I'm a company, I'm like, well, I have to do 10 of these, or that sort of thing. Well, hopefully that won't be additional work. It'll be the work that is already being done, applied and demonstrated and communicated in perhaps a different format. But I am not naive enough to think that there is a risk of duplication, but I would much rather focus on the complementarity of the projects, of the codes and the systems to help give that added level of confidence, which we know is needed in some communities.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks, Paul. And I think that's what we're really talking about at the end of the day, is making sure that our regulatory frameworks are complementary to give that confidence back to communities. I think you articulated that beautifully. We've got a couple more questions. I've got to be honest, they're putting you through your paces. It's fantastic to see the level of engagement coming in from this audience. We've got one from Les, who I think might be up in Queensland somewhere. Les, forgive me if I'm wrong. But Les's question is whether a DRS assessment is a requirement for all renewable energy developers, regardless of geographic region, and asking whether it will also apply, for example, into urban areas.
So
or be an option into urban areas, perhaps.
Yeah. So the short answer is it's not a requirement in any jurisdiction currently. It is still a voluntary scheme that we are continuing to advocate for its adoption, and even arcing back to the point that was just being made around being complementary to other existing or upcoming legislative changes, to be able to complement in and feed into, because I mean the worst thing that could happen is you add, get more red tape to slow the transition, right? So we will continue to advocate for its consideration into any new schemes or legislation, so that industry has the benefit of going through one framework. Admittedly, it's not perfect for every application, right? But where it can be leveraged, that's something we would continue to push for.
Thanks so much, Paul. Just to pivot slightly, we have a question in relation to whether there are any specific guidelines that relate to battery energy and storage systems that developers of those systems could actually be exploring under the DRS.
Yeah, so through our consultation, what we found was the majority of the best representation was part of a generation project as well, as opposed to best as standalone. So generally, we have approached in the same way, right? The idea they have a much smaller footprint, generally speaking, a best project. So the onus on the breadth of the consultation will be reflective of the scale of the project as well. So short answer, no. Longer answer is it's catered to.
Brilliant, thank you. And then we actually have, I'm going to do a bit of bundling here because we have a couple of questions that relate directly to community engagement. And I think this one is really fascinating because community engagement is such a tricky area for us to get right, really. You know, it means different things to different entities. So the people who are assessing the community engagement practices, are they experts in community engagement themselves? So that'll be part one of the question. And Paul, I think that one's really to you. But then the second part of this question that I put together is, well, how will the scheme actually rate poor community engagement for a project in one area, but good engagement in other regions? Will that pull the company's whole score down, or how will that dynamic be managed?
Yeah, excellent. Great questions. I've heard the first question from industry before, but I will address it here as well. So the idea of the whole consultation in designing the framework is we had representation from around 50 industry operators in terms of like they had their community engagement staff participate in those consultation panels, right? So we're drawing out the relevant and important factors that translate to good engagement, right, from those professionals, as well as the stakeholders that then are on the other side of that engagement. Generally, positively, they're pretty aligned in terms of what they both believe to be good engagement, right? So that was reassuring out of the design process. Do we have experts who have done community engagement on the ground? No. What we do have is experts at applying rating frameworks. So suffice to say, we will rate industries and companies operating in various sectors. It would be impossible for a ratings agency to have an expert in every industry, right? But what we do get from that is the benefit of that mosaic information coming together as well. So because we don't play in a pigeonhole necessarily, we can build on the mosaic effect. We do have really highly qualified staff that are engaged here, so they're pretty much they will be post-grad qualifications in business, commerce, finance. So they're really strong at assessing business outcomes. And we have experts in, professional management staff as well who can bring in their expertise. But what I'm going to lean on here is that we've leant on industry and stakeholders to design the framework of what good looks like. We're able to apply that and look for the evidences that support what good is in community engagement. Absent that, we've got that scale of being able to grade the maturity. The second part of the question was, what happens if they're good on one project and not so good on the other? Okay, so there are two elements to this. One is it is the aggregate result, but the second is that we appreciate companies mature and get better over time. So is it a case that actually they did perform quite badly on historical project, right? And we can see that through the artifacts and the evidences provided. We can see that they have matured as an organization, implemented new processes, gone about it a different way, learnt their lesson on the next project. Yeah, let's pay credit where it's due when they can acknowledge that they can do better, and they have then done better. So there's two parts to that. Yes, it is captured, but we also afford the benefit when companies do better and learn.
Thanks so much, Paul. And I'm just very conscious we are actually now at time, but we have two more questions. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to answer each of them if we can do that. So The first one should be pretty quick and easy. How often will developers be assessed? Will a developer be assessed with each new project, or is there a reassessment on a time-based cycle? Well, I think that's probably one for you.
Annually for the company as opposed to the project.
Perfect, thank you. And our final question to close us out is, Paul, you mentioned that Equifax set up the ICERT rating scheme for the construction industry. Was there resistance from that industry to the introduction to this scheme? And I'm actually just going to expand on this slightly and say, what are the lessons that you would take from the experience with the construction industry to really be able to convey out to the renewables space now?
Short answer is yes. Yes, there was opposition and resistance to it. So sometimes it's tied to there's not a problem here, nothing to see here, you don't need to, not needed is the opposition. Others will go, you know what, I value this because here I am as an industry operator competing with someone over here who just cuts corners, does the wrong thing, costs me more to do the right thing, and here they are doing the wrong thing. So actually this helps level the playing field so that you can tell us apart. So I think that's the key thing, right? Good companies embrace the support that comes from being able to differentiate themselves from where the problem lies.
Fantastic. No, that was great, Paul. Thank you. All right. Well, I might close us off there, but a huge thank you once again to Tony, to Paul, to Alex, to Charlie, to everyone behind the scenes that has been involved within the DRS development. This is really exciting. It's such a positive step forward to be able to give that transparency, that accountability, and at the end of the day, confidence back to farmers and rural communities. Thank you to all of those of you who have joined us online today. The questions have been fantastic, and I know I've certainly learned a lot from both Tony and Paul through this discussion. And finally, thank you to Georgia and the FCA team in the back end who have been running this to make sure that all of the logistics work seamlessly. A recording of the webinar will be available. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out and submit them. And I do apologise to those that we didn't get through at the end of the day. Thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate all of your work and have a wonderful weekend. End recording,
Thanks,
Georgia.
Verity. Bye.